What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the neighborhood, and thank you for spending part of your day with us today. If you're a returning listener, thank you and welcome back. And if this happens to be your first episode, thank you and welcome to the show. Welcome to the podcast where two longtime friends and sometimes a guest talk about their favorite games from the perspective of an average player. My name is Andrew Kimball.
And I'm Dylan Wren, and we are your friendly neighborhood gamers.
On today's episode, we are joined by a professional podcast editor as well as podcast host. If you hate editing your podcast, he's the one to call. He'll make sure you sound incredible so you can focus on the other aspects of running a podcast. He's also the host of the newly relaunched Dead Drop Game News podcast, a show that gives you all the gaming news you need without any of the filler in 10 minutes or less. Please welcome to the show, Matthew Bliss. How's it going, man?
Yeah, it's great. It's a little bit later in the evening than you guys for the time of recording, but we're all here. That's all we can hope for any kind of podcast recording.
Yes, that is the struggle of anyone who likes to have guests on their show, is that figuring out like, okay, what time zone are you in? How can we make this work? Because we want to have you on. And like, what is a good time for you? So
yeah, and it's next to impossible. Like, you can probably hear from my voice that I'm Australian. Some people can't tell, but I'm Australian. And at the moment in Europe versus Australia, the daylight savings thing is kicking in and turning off. But there's a month gap in between when that happens. So Australia has started their daylight savings, but here where I live in Ireland, we haven't yet finished daylight savings.
Yeah.
So if you planned something a month ago, your time zone calculations may have been completely off. Or, you kind of have to send out an invitation and hope that Google Calendar figures it out or something. That's the only way to get it done.
Wow, that's so bizarre that it's like staggered like that.
Yeah, but you guys always have the argument, presuming both in the US, that daylight savings should or should not exist. I hear that come up in the news for you guys every 4 years or so.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because I feel like there's been the legislation or whatever introduced that's like, let's just stop doing this. And I thought it was done, but it still keeps happening. So I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. There must be some sort of capitalist advantage to having to change all the clocks. Maybe the batteries go out faster, so battery factories,
right?
And revenue and profits and whatever. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. One of those things where it's like, well, we've always had it, so why don't we just keep doing it? It's like, but I mean, we are getting into the fall behind one where we gain the extra hour. So like a lot of people are like, oh, well, that's not terrible. It's like getting more.
If we're talking about it for too long, I think that there's a podcast that I listen to called Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. It's by Will Smith and Brad Shoemaker, both of Giant Bomb and Tested and a bunch of, whiskey media favorites from back in the day. And around the same time every year, they talk about the daylight savings thing. Just because it's a nerdy thing to talk about. But
yeah,
there's a changeover when daylight savings kicks in. I think it's when it kicks in that everybody is collectively late for the thing. And so they drive to work more hazardly. So there's more car accidents in like the first week of daylight savings, which means there's actually road tolls that go up for that reason. And then the change again on the other side probably causes something similar. And there's been studies on that. Like, they report it. And that's probably the ammo that gets up to Parliament or whatever when they're deciding whether they should do daylight savings or not. But the idea that you have to change something that changes everything every year, is that too much change or not enough? Like it becomes a philosophical argument at that point. And I don't know if we could deal with it as humanity, so maybe that's why it hasn't changed.
Right. Right.
Well, and like at least in the US, then you have some states like specifically Arizona and I think Hawaii that are just like, we're not doing it. And so then your time difference between Arizona goes from 2 hours to 1 hour depending on what time of the year it is, and so it's a mess.
They are the Kramer of the Seinfeld United States.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've also been, quote unquote, switching to metric for like 50 years. So, we'll see how this goes.
It's never going to happen, guys. If it was, it would have happened by now for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, just learn your feet in inches already, Dylan. It's never going to happen.
To reveal another thing that I kind of dive into a little bit is fitness. I always love hearing that the advice for the amount of protein people should consume is 1 gram per pound of body weight. And you're like, that makes sense. 1 gram per pound, but pounds are in imperial, grams are in metric. So what do we do there?
Yep.
Yeah, what do we do without our smartphones to answer questions like that for us?
Yeah, precisely. Or maybe that's why the fitness industry is so filled with influencers, because you'd rather listen to some ripped guy or some really slim girl tell you about these things instead of having to calculate it yourself.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, that was an excellent primer. I'm already excited to see where this episode's going to go. We're going to start out, we're going to get to know you on this episode, first of all, I should say. We're going to get to know you as like a content creator and what you do in podcasting and all of that. And then we're going to get to know you as a gamer a little bit in the back half of the show. So the first question that I usually ask to start this off is just kind of, what do you do? Like if you were going to explain it to somebody, give me the pitch on your show. You've been editing podcasts since the first part of this year. So, how would you pitch that?
Okay. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I've recently moved to Ireland with my wife. We've moved here from Australia. The story with podcasting, at least, began in 2020, as most podcasters' stories have. With that which will not be named. But I started it through work. So I'm actually teacher trained. I've done IT support in schools. I'm teacher trained to deliver IT and history. And I've been doing technology training and live events and technology SME and a bunch of other stuff for state government in Australia as well. So moving to remote work in Australia during the pandemic meant that I had a lot of space to try to, play with a few things. And podcasting was one of those things. Internal organizational podcasting, that is. And as you can imagine, a big government department that wants to penny pinch wherever it can, trying to learn how to do it yourself and do it for them for free and control all the content and have it all internal is really appealing. So in 2020 is when I started learning how to do podcasting itself. I started with, as everybody does, the Blue Yeti.
Yep.
Fortunately, it was on the company's dime, so I was able to get the full streamer bundle and
Nice.
Ended up with the Compass Arm as well. And look, this is always the fun bit about podcasting. If anybody listening is a podcaster as well, then they'll be aware of the discourse that's probably been around for like 6 or 7 years at this point. Blue Yetis are awful. But they are only awful for as long as you don't put in the effort to try and make them good. Now, this is where I need to qualify what I say. So I think that the way I always describe the Blue Yeti is a microphone that doesn't make good podcasts, but it makes good podcasters. And the reason for this is that it is so sensitive. It's a condenser mic, so it picks up the entire room. It's full of reverb. People have to learn the difference between cardioid and omnidirectional because they wonder why they can hear themselves on the other side of the room as well as in front of the microphone. Finding out where the front of the microphone is, that's even a bit difficult sometimes. So I spent probably a good 1.5 years with that, dialing it in, keeping, the sound dampened as much as possible, really trying to tune up my voice so it sounded like it wasn't being made in the middle of a concert hall. And I did that very successfully. Did a few podcasts with the organization I was with. Unfortunately, it didn't really take off internally because there wasn't as much investment. You'd think at least one person driving it in an organization of 5,500 people might be okay. Turns out it's not, because everyone needs to have their say about what happens. Government. Anyway.
Yeah.
From that point, personal podcasting took off. I think I've done 2 personal podcasts that have since disappeared with my cousin and some mates. I've also got the Teaching Culture cast, which I did by myself because I was teacher trained and not teaching. I interviewed teachers to talk about stuff that's going on. And then I started to get into games podcasting a little bit. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I think I had the same idea as most gamers do with regards to podcasts. You want to sit in a room with, 3 or 4 of your mates and just share your opinions about video games. So did that a little bit with one other person. Oh, no, 2 other people, sorry. And then I started floating around a bit and I found podcasts like Super Bracket Bros and the now no longer available Game & Watch podcast. And I think I was with them for about six months, maybe a year, doing stuff with them, trying to find out. And then I got, the gumption to do my own solo podcast. And that's when what started as, I think I just called it the Dead Drop at the time, which I thought was, it's clear. People have played Morrowind or Oblivion, right? They know what the Dark Brotherhood is, so they'd know what a Dead Drop is. That little tree stump in that one town that's near the entrance to the Dark Brotherhood Hall. Turns out it wasn't succinct enough, so then it became Dead Drop Game News. But the idea there was that I do very short recordings explaining the news, getting rid of the fluff, making sure that there's a bit of media literacy in there as well. I think I even did an episode that unpacked 3 articles that had 3 specific ways in which the articles get padded or are misleading or just contain misinformation.
Yeah.
And I put Markiplier on the front going like, those good clickbaity titles. There's a bit of irony. So the media literacy component of the podcast has always been a big one. And what else? Just before we moved at the beginning of this year, so the year being 2023, we decided to move from Australia to Ireland because my wife is Irish. And trying to get that move happening just became a bit too much. So I had to put the Dead Drop Game News podcast on hold in February or March. I can't remember when the last episode was. And I've just rebooted it again. So I'm hoping I can sustain it this time, considering I'm doing podcast editing full time for other people now. And we also started a podcast for ourselves, sharing experiences of the move, which is quite a big deal to a lot of people, mostly because it's really hard to bind the information you need all together in one spot.
Yeah.
So it's called From My Home to Yours. It's just me and my wife talking about stuff. There's a few episodes where I interviewed people about taxes and car insurance and embassies and visas and stuff like that. So
yeah,
that was a really good pet project for us. And that's been on hold for a little bit too, mostly because there's no moving left to be done. We've kind of settled in a little bit.
Yeah.
So when you've got nothing left to do to move, we're kind of wondering where the podcast goes at this point. So
right. Is it on hold or did it achieve its goal,
Yeah, that's the thing. And we know there's always more to share. So
right.
We figure we're now going into phase 2, which is, all right, you've done the thing. Now, how do you live the life and, sustain what you've got? Because we've kind of put a year on it. We're going to see how it goes and then reassess at the end of that year or just before and see if we can, if we want to stay here or if we want to go back to Australia. Because we've still got our jobs over there. We've got a house over there that we're renting to other people. We're kind of set up so we can just slot back into our lives if we need to. So, yeah. And it's been a little bit difficult for me to find a job. Turns out that Ireland's not so keen on having a productivity, technology-focused trainer, ex-teacher who can do IT support and help with change in organizations. Not really a job for that. So, yeah, I've been leaning into the podcasting full time. And fortunately, I've got enough clients now where I don't really, well, actually, if I browse jobs, I can look at it and say, well, I make more than that in an hour of doing my podcast work instead of earning it in a day in a job that I probably wouldn't be such a fan of. So
yeah,
I feel really fortunate to be in the position that I'm in now. And
yeah.
So podcasting full time, probably podcast number 8 at this point. But yeah, it's been a great journey. Really interesting to try and put it succinctly too. Feels like a long story, and it's even longer in real life. But yeah,
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, something you mentioned that I think is very interesting, I'd like to kind of hear more from you on, is it sounds like most of the projects, most of the podcasts that you've been involved with have kind of come into it with a pretty clear like goal, a pretty clear, like you're talking about how Dead Drop, you wanted to present news succinctly and also mix in some media literacy. With your From Our Home to Yours, you wanted to kind of work towards like, here are all of the disparate things that you might need to know if you're moving from one country to another, and let's talk about that. So tell me a little bit about kind of how you're coming up with like a new podcast, a new topic. How do you work through that process?
Well, it's not a short journey. Like at the start, I mentioned hey, let's get a couple of mates into a room and talk about video games for 3 hours, because that works for Giant Bomb, that works for Rooster Teeth, that works for IGN, and they're successful. Why wouldn't that work? The first couple of podcasts that I did, actually, one was Restart Games that I did with my cousin and one of his friends, and that was really good. That was actually a really succinct episode type as well, where the game was really focused on a backlog. Like, we went through old games. It's been that long since I've run it.
Yeah.
We each picked a game from our backlog and reviewed it on an episode. But we do the usual banter thing at the start. It would be as succinct as possible, probably 40, 45 minutes an episode. But that was just a time sink for the people involved. But that was kind of a premise. And before that, it was Lad Banter. That was my cousin and another one of his friends. They're all my friends too, but that was just talking about random stuff, The more podcasts you do, the more you realize that you need to have a very direct idea of what people are going to be listening to. And it's so easy to build one that appeals to you and can feel really easy. So many people out there go, here's a podcast with my thoughts about everything. It could be well-being, it could be video games, it could be movies, it could be anything. But the audience doesn't know what to expect. So if you're thinking of making a podcast, it's a really good idea to drill down to exactly what you want it to be about. Because then it'll be easy not only to make the content, but also to get people on board that definitely want to be around for it. Now, Dead Drop Game News came about as a very short headline-based show because I knew I didn't have a whole lot of recording time available to me with a full-time job and a bunch of other requirements of my time. I needed something short. And the thing that I noticed after doing a bunch of guest spots on other podcasts, like Game Watch podcast, a few others that now escape my mind, I noticed that I was really good at remembering weird news stuff and making connections between those articles, like remembering something from 6 months ago that, people have forgotten about, but you connect with a story that's come up more recently. And then you can kind of thread a narrative through that. So I definitely knew I wanted the podcast to be about news, but I wanted to add my opinions in there because there had to be value for someone that wasn't just, doing a speech to text of what you get from, an RSS reader or something.
Yeah.
For news updates from your different games, news media outlets. And then there's a bit of comedy in there as well. You gotta put a bit of snark in there and and give people a laugh. I've sometimes received messages from people who listen and they're like, I literally just spat out my juice when I heard you say that. I can't believe that you, said that thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just really direct and it grew over time. One of the things that I really wanted was a lot of engagement from people listening. And it's really easy when you start a podcast to hunger for that engagement too. Like you begin and you're like, great, 10 people listened to this episode. How do I get those 10 people to tell me that they listened and what they liked about it?
Yeah.
And then you won't hear from them ever.
Yeah.
So I kind of devolved the show a little bit there too, where I did a spoiler cast on Inscription with someone that I knew. That was a 3-hour podcast in a feed of otherwise 10-minute episodes, which,
Mm.
in retrospect, really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But I was trying new things to see what could happen. A person who also runs a show with two of his mates called Podcube, he became a big fan, really liked Scorn, and in anticipating its release, he wanted to know a little bit more about the weird development history of it, because it was on the cards for a while, and then it wasn't coming, and then it came, and it was announced, and there was budget things, and it was bought up by publishers, and he just wanted that concisely in an episode. So I thought, I'll just do that for other people listening. If you have a big question, I'll spend 10 minutes of this podcast just linking it all together for you. Just that one question. Unfortunately, he was the only one. So
Right.
that idea also got shelved. And yeah, then we decided to move to Ireland, and it kind of just got put on the shelf at that point. So coming from my home to yours after doing that with the Dead Drop, we knew that we were two people without kids, one Australian, one Irish, moving to Ireland, which is incredibly rare. You wouldn't think it. There's a very strong Irish population in Australia. Most of the Irish people over there marry other Irish people, and they have kids. And so they want to be close to family. They also want to take advantage of the free schooling and education system over here for kids, which I don't know what it's like in the US, but in Australia, you have to pay regardless of whether it's government or private.
Mm.
There's some subsidies there, but you always more than usually have to pay. And I think you get your undergraduate degree for free here too, which is nuts. Like if you're making a forward investment of 18 years with 2 extra bodies you have to feed, like that's thousands of dollars saved. So of course you'd want to come back. Yeah, but the Australian moving back to Ireland is a bit odd, and not having kids is a bit odd. So we thought we'd target that market and provide advice based on that, but also share not only our experiences, but our thoughts, our emotions. And we also bundled it together like an email chain. You write emails to your family back home when you move to another country for a few months. We kind of did that for this too. So people that we know listen also get a bit of an update of what we're up to.
Right.
They get a bit of Matt and Bernadine banter. And then there's the portion where we talk about, what we've done or whatever the subject is for that episode to inform. So it's a bit of a two-barreled one, but very concise. But it's just an idea that came about, If you're a podcaster that's been doing things for like 3 years, much like how I edited for other people, you kind of think, well, how can I do this for other people? Or how can I leverage this talent, which is just innate in me? How can I make this work for something that we're going to do? Fortunately, we had the space moving to Ireland to record this podcast, as opposed to me doing Dead Drop Game News. But yeah, it's an interesting one. But look, the process to narrow down exactly what a podcast should be, you just have to think about it for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
I think to be uncharitable, people get a little bit lazy. And I think there's a thing about authenticity as well. Like, I want to be authentic to myself. I should be able to talk about whatever interests me. That's fine. But if the podcast is, the Andrew show or the Dylan show, doesn't tell you what it's about, it tells them that it's you, but the growth will probably be a bit slow, and you want that sustainability to come through. So, yeah. But if it was Andrew does Star Wars, because I can see a Darth Maul picture behind you there, that tells you a little bit more. Like, okay, we're going to get a bit of Star Wars here. We don't know if Andrew likes it or he doesn't. Let's listen and find out.
Yeah.
You kind of, narrowing that precision for a podcast, it really does help.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly hope that answered the question. It's not going to be 20-minute answers for every question you give me, guys, I promise.
Yeah, no, well, but I think that's a great, answer. And I think it's interesting because, part of what we want to do here is, and we'll get into some of these questions is like, people who want to do what you do, like I think that's a great answer to help them just think about like, okay, well, what do I want to do? And like you kind of alluded to, I think there's sort of like, well, what's your goal with the show? Is it to inform people, or, do you just want to, like there's nothing wrong for sure with making a show of like, I just want to get on here and talk about whatever I want to talk about. And I'm fine with the slower growth or whatever. But if I want to like target that niche audience, let me do that. And here's a way to drill down, So thank you. That was good. I think that was a very good answer.
Just to add to that as well, there's also a perfectionist slant on this where people want to do a podcast, but they don't because they feel like they haven't got their niche or they haven't got their market. And it's the first one they're doing and they want it to be successful the first time. So they wait and they see what happens. But ultimately, failing faster is going to be the way that you get better. Like you look at like CrossFit athletes and you think, oh, wow, they went to a CrossFit gym. And then a year later, they were fit enough to join the CrossFit Games. And, now they're on the podium. That's a really short story. I bet that's achievable for me. And then you hear that they did weightlifting until they were 13. And then they broke their back. And then they rehabilitated that and they did track. And they've actually got like 21 years of fitness and, athletic related stuff that they did before they went to their first CrossFit gym. It's the same with podcasting too. Like just because you want to do a podcast with 3 of your mates, do it. Absolutely do it. And the sooner you do it, the sooner you'll sound terrible. The sooner you'll figure out how to make it sound good.
Right.
The sooner you'll lose your friends because you keep telling them things like, hey, stop getting off the microphone, or hey, don't eat the apple right before we get onto the podcast. Actually, that's a bad thing because apparently an apple is great to stop those mouth clicks. Marshmallows as well. Just chuck a marshmallow in and then start talking on your podcast and you don't need the mouth declick with RX10.
Huh.
But yeah, you don't lose friends because you don't have to tell them what they do with their mouth when they just want to talk about video games,
Yeah.
So yeah, fail fast and don't be a perfectionist. Do the thing and then eventually do it right.
Yes.
Yeah, I have kind of a follow-up on, you're talking about drilling down and finding what you want your show to be. Well, you're kind of rebooting and relaunching your Dead Drop Game News podcast. So what is that reboot? What does that look like? What are the new things that you're doing with that show?
So this kind of stems from a bit of an inspiration for the show. So in podcasting, there is a show called Pod News that also does a newsletter. They are a big, don't even know what to call them, a big support for the podcasting industry in the space that understands what they do. James Cridland, he hosts that show, and I think he kind of co-hosts the entire enterprise with someone called Sam Sethi. And James Cridland has got like 20 years of broadcasting with the BBC under his belt. He now lives in Queensland, Australia. But the format of the Pod News show that he does every single day, except for weekends, I think that's usually the definition of a daily show these days,
Right.
is he runs down headlines around podcasting and provides the links to the articles so that people can find out more if they need to. But he does these so concisely with a little bit of snark and gives the industry what they need to kind of leapfrog into something else. Now, podcasting as an industry is like games. It's like content creation in the video game space. There's things that are very inside baseball about podcasting that you kind of have to know but don't really want to actively seek out. And there's also the things that everybody kind of should know, like Spotify is offering to certain podcasters the ability to translate their podcast into other languages. Great. That starts the conversation about who gets it, how do you get it, what are the rights of your voice content in other languages once it's in Spotify's camp. That's Spotify expanding the space for podcasting, all that kind of thing. But he doesn't explain it so much. And I was doing a lot of explaining on the Dead Drop before, where I would do like 6 stories, I think, because I'd spend about 2 minutes on each story. I had my deadline of 10 minutes, which kind of restricted me a little bit. It made sure that I wasn't going to make an episode that was too long for you to listen to, and that I would take too long to record because I had to plan that time very well. So when I was thinking of changing how the Dead Drop was going to be, it wasn't about the content not hitting right, because I know that people who listened to it enjoyed it, because I had fairly consistent numbers. Some people would drift in and out, but most people who listened to one listened to the ones afterwards. But I had to make sure it was sustainable for me. Now, if you're putting together stuff about the game news and assessing what is the critical information, how do I remove the fluff, and how do I skew this in a way that kind of, subtextually teaches you about what media literacy kind of is like in gaming news, it takes a bit of effort, even if you're only doing like a paragraph or two. And a lot of the dead drop that I did before this reboot was completely off the dome. Like, I wanted it to be as little effort for me as possible.
Yeah.
So with my background in training and teaching and all that stuff, I had the ability to put together ideas into something cogent as I recorded. So I would read an article and then I would regurgitate it back in whatever form that took, keeping it as succinct as possible. But, I didn't plan that. So now I spend time, I grab articles, I put it into maybe 2.5 paragraphs, as short as possible. And I read that for the podcast so that I don't have to deviate. I'm not re-recording myself, which took a lot of time. And it was James Cridland's Pod News that really was the inspiration for that, because it has to be sustainable. It has to be done in a way that makes sense for you. And the way that I'm doing it now, I can do research throughout the day, do those summaries, write them up. I could do a catchy thumbnail, which I'm starting to do for the YouTube portion of the podcast now, because it's tough to keep people around for audio-only content there. But yeah, piecemealing those things throughout the day makes it sustainable for me. I'm not tying myself to the 10 minutes anymore. I know it will probably be 5 to 10 minutes, but, whatever it is what it will be. I know it's going to be short. I know it's going to be concise. And yeah, once it's scripted, I literally just have to record it. Got some processing that is automatic, makes it really easy to do. When you're editing yourself, you're your own worst enemy, so I try to avoid that where I can. But other than that, keeping it very concise. That was the inspiration from Pod News, to make that something simple.
Yeah.
And it could very easily be a show where I unpack NVIDIA's, projected earnings versus the trouble they got in. I think it was halfway through last year when they tried to declare their earnings from graphics cards sold directly to Bitcoin miners into their gaming division. But someone unpacked that and went, "Ooh, okay, that's $12 million where you sold graphics cards directly to Bitcoin miners in a market that thinks that's deplorable, but also in a dearth of graphics cards. No one could get them in the pandemic. And so they became horrendously expensive, which made NVIDIA more money. And all of a sudden, there's an incentive there for them to remove them from the market. You could do a whole 10 minutes on that, but I don't want to be the guy who does that as much as I want to.
Yeah.
So I put the links in the show notes. You guys can explore more if you'd like to read more about it.
Yeah.
Or, send me an email and I'll have some more ideas that will ultimately fail perhaps, but we'll see what happens.
So going back to just you've had such a broad experience in the whole world of podcasting, but was there anything that kind of surprised you about, you can go either way, but with creating a podcast, or if in the editing thing, you've been doing that pretty recently. So, just however you want to take this question, but is there something that stands out to you as having surprised you getting into all this?
So for the podcast editing stuff, you kind of, everything that you're told about podcasting, you assume that the work's there, right? For every Adobe Podcast Enhance tool or studio sound from Descript that, masters your audio for you, there are organizations like NPR that exist that hire audio production companies. And that audio production companies exist, so you must necessarily think that there's a market there, at least to, edit other people's content.
Yeah.
The thing that surprised me is that I thought it would be very difficult to get clients to make the podcast editing happen.
Right.
But being in the position that I've been in, as someone who's made podcasts for a long time, a relatively long time. Long time sounds like decades, but it's,
Right.
It's a relatively new medium anyway. Yeah.
Well, add or remove whatever time dilation you like to whatever happened during the pandemic. Well, for context, I was in Melbourne, one of the most locked down cities in the world. I think we had 5 or 6 varying length lockdowns where we just had to stay at home. So feels like time both went long and slow during those periods, which is odd. But what I did a lot of at the beginning was not only making my own content, but guesting on other people's content. And there's a connection that you make there, or at the very least that I did. I cast my brush broad when I was looking for guest opportunities on podcasts, not focused on growing my shows, more so just to be on podcasts, So I've got a couple of episodes on Who Arted. It's a teacher out of, I think it's Illinois somewhere, who runs 2 art-based podcasts for primary and secondary students, just unpacking pieces of art. I've done an episode about Mario, and an episode was something about the Nebuchadnezzar by Arthur Boyd, who's an Australian artist. But you wouldn't think going on an art program would be the way to go about that. But, that's a connection. That's someone in America that I know who's a podcaster who's now been acquired or has a relationship with a podcast network and is starting to, move up that journey into bigger things with theirs. There's the podcast that I mentioned before, who was the super fan of my show, attached to Podcube, which everybody should listen to. It's like a short, immersive sketch show kind of thing, on the premise that the Podcube is a thing that can record audio from any time or place in human history, which makes it really interesting. But they're hilarious guys, Jordan, Mason, and Tucker. When I found them, I was massive fans of their content, so I let them know. And there weren't many people engaging with them at the time. And now I'm editing for one of them, and I've done content on Podcube for their Patreon channel as well. What else? You kind of attach yourself to podcasting communities, and all of a sudden you're kind of loosely connected to a bunch of other people who know other people, and they know other people. And, it's crazy how much goodwill there is in podcasting, but that one relationship where you met someone for 30 minutes and had a good time and they were just great to chat to, just kind of turns into something great that connects you to a broader community. So a lot of the clients I've gotten are people that I've worked with or have been made through people that I know in podcasting that I've either edited for or been on shows with. And I think that's the thing that's really important, I think, for people that want to make an impact in podcasting itself.
Yeah.
Because it feels so easy to do a podcast for a bit, get good at it, make a podcast about podcasting. That's your lead funnel into your learning content or your editing services, and then they come in droves. But as we know with podcasts, build it and they will come. They will not come.
Yeah.
So if you know that you're going to be editing podcasts, making relationships with podcasters is a good idea. So that's the thing that I didn't expect to be so easy.
Yeah.
But of course, having the luxury of tackling it full time really helps as well. Having the time available to be able to edit for more than, 2 or 3 people at a time, that space really helps.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I've been fortunate in a lot of ways, but the networking thing, that's really what took me by surprise. And I guess I'm just a nice guy. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that's definitely something that I think we've heard echoed, is just the community that forms around podcasting. It tends to be a very open and welcoming one. And it just kind of you spend a little bit of time in it, you start being oh, so this person who knows this person, it all bunch of the indie podcast scene kind of knows each other, which is always such a cool part, I think, of being in it. What's been some of the more difficult parts of your journey, and in your content side of things?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think the hardest bit is getting started. For me, that is getting started, the perfectionism and the subsequent imposter syndrome for anything. And look, like I mentioned before, what kind of came up for me as a surprise, having a network of people I could talk to make opportunities happen. Subsequently, you can kind of be your own worst enemy when it comes to this stuff too. So for a long time when I was starting out with podcast editing, and podcast guesting and podcasting in general, actually, all of it, let's just tie it all together.
Yeah.
What I do is that I lean very much into making it easy for you as possible, because that's something that I inherently do in whatever job I've got. You work in IT support, you don't matter. It's about getting the answer for the person you're supporting with the technology.
Right.
Of course, you're there and, they should be respectful to you and all those kinds of things, but you're there in service to someone else. So I made sure that I was doing that for everybody. For podcast guesting, much like I did for yourselves, I was like, is the gain high enough there? Am I too close? Am I too far away from the microphone? How do you want this? Do you like WAV or MP3? Like, someone's asked for FLAC before, which is interesting. But yeah, I was always doing everything for them to make it as easy as possible for them to do. And that can kind of shoot you in the foot sometimes, just because you end up scrambling and doing a bunch of stuff for them that you probably didn't need to do. Ultimately, it was a lot of worry that didn't matter. And then you make it more complicated for yourself. So something with the podcast editing particularly, I used to walk into the conversation and say, how do you do it now? Let me just work in with what you're doing and, make it as easy for you as possible to get what you need done. But it's always harder than you think. Like, you can't just jump on their computer and use all the things that they've been using to make it happen. There kind of has to be a process in there for you to make it as easy as possible for them to give you what you need to get the job done. And that could be file uploads, it could be recording sharing, it could be getting feedback on content edits. For a long time, I was like, hey, just tell me what we need to cut down or change. And then eventually I made a timestamp template for them to write down the exact moment at which it changes, and then that needs to be removed, and then I remove it for them. Those things, they really help. But it's the perfectionism for being in service to others, that kind of combination of things can really shoot you in the foot. At the same time, you shouldn't err on the other side, where they have to work in with you entirely and you offer them nothing except exactly what you offer as part of your service. So the perfectionism in service of others is, it's great to have, but if you're not doing things for yourself to make it easier for them to work with you, then it's not gonna work out for you. But that's where the imposter syndrome kicks in. Like, you doing this with them, they give you no feedback about them liking or not liking the process, so you second guess yourself at every single point. Same with a guest spot. Like, I could be sitting here on the podcast with you, looking at your faces, being incredibly quiet and focusing on what I'm saying because you're diligent podcasters. But because I'm not getting any reaction from you while I'm speaking, I could, panic about not getting anything from you and being like, oh God, is this good? Should I dial it up? Should I scream or something? It's very easy to have that kind of imposter syndrome about whether you're delivering value in whatever you're doing. So some balance of perfectionism and imposter syndrome, or just, a healthy critical reflection on whatever you're doing. That's probably the balance that I've found it hardest to make happen in a way that gives them what they want and gives me what I need to be able to do exactly what I'm doing. The simple answer would be, how much do you charge? But that's an interesting question. That
for sure.
Also requires its own podcast.
Yes.
So what do you kind of, I guess, the flip side of that, what has been the most rewarding part?
See, this is an idea I've had for a podcast. This is going to be a 20-minute answer. There's a what does he call himself? He's an ethnographer. Simon Sinek, big in the personal development space, working in organizational development. He wrote a book called The Infinite Game, where an infinite game is a game where the goal is to go forever, as opposed to finite games, which have a set goal and you achieve that goal and then the game is over. I like to treat podcasting as an infinite game for that reason. It's not about getting to 1,000 listeners. It's not about making millions of dollars a month because you're an excellent podcast editor. It's about staying in the game for as long as you can. Keep on editing, keep on improving, keep on learning, keep on talking, and have your devices work. All those things together turn podcasting into, I guess, putting it as succinctly as possible, you could bite this for the content, for the social content too, to make sure it's podcasting and not podcasted. Like, I want to make sure that it's continuing for me constantly.
Yeah.
So the most rewarding thing for me is that I haven't just, thrown my hands in the air, sold all the microphones, and just, filled the rest of that time with games, or found, streaming or becoming a hermit philosopher or something like that. You could literally do anything with your time. And that's one of the funniest things. I reflect on it and I'm like, what did I do before podcasting? Like I spend all this time engaging with people about podcasting, creating podcasts, guesting on podcasts, editing other people's podcasts. There used to be a time where I just came home from work, sat down, ate some dinner, watched a TV show, and play a game and go to bed. But once you start that, I think it's really hard to let it go. So I think the most rewarding part for me is just being able to continue without there being any sign of stopping. I think that has to be the answer. Because I've already talked about the relationships I've made. Those have been amazing. I'm sure there's plenty more relationships to come. And the more people you know in the podcasting industry, the more it's just going to help you find more people,
Yeah, for sure. Because it sounds like you're finding it to still be something that you are enjoying and that seems sustainable for the long run, which is, a wonderful thing to find, because there's a lot of things that end up being something that's loses kind of its shine after a little bit, or something that just, is like, you're enjoying it, you're having fun, but it's taking so much out of you just to keep up with it that it's like, all right, this is not a sustainable way to do this. So,
well, this is where I can apply the cautionary tale, which is me looking at the can kicked down the road about where I am now being good, where I'm starting to get more and more clients for my podcast editing. I'm starting to make enough money where it's like a full-time job. There is only so much time in the day and only so many hands for mouses and keyboards that I can apply to edit these podcasts. Anyone in the entrepreneurial creator space is going to tell you that as you grow, you should outsource things to other people, and you should reduce the time you spend doing that thing so you can grow into more things. That's not something you can do with podcast editing. You can outsource it to other people, but those people aren't you unless you've trained them. And if podcast editing is the thing that you enjoy the most, then you're going to want to hang on to that. But you can't. You can't scale time unless you've got a time turner or something, a time machine where you can just get more and more out of your day, and you have like a server farm of Matthews editing consistently, and you grow at 4 times the rate that you expect to. So scaling the podcast thing for me, in order to be able to make more money, why wouldn't we want to make more money and reinvest that back into other things? I think for me is going to mean creating learning content, because that's something I know how to do well, scaling that as a service to other people, but in a market for podcasting where that is saturated, how successful will that be? That's just what I'm musing about at the moment. But something for anyone who's considering podcast editing, I would say prepare for it to not be the only thing in your arsenal, unless you want it to be the only thing that can make you money. But that's the great thing about podcast editing, getting better at making other people sound good, you can make yourself sound good as well. So maybe the other avenues there are you create a highly sound designed, well-built podcast, invest some of your podcast editing money to make it a full production, and all of a sudden you have a singularly made Radio Lab style thing where you talk about stuff that you don't even has nothing to do with podcasting, you know?
Yeah.
And then you get massive ad dollars come through for that, and then you start browsing the space. But again, you have to be able to dedicate the time. So maybe that's less editing time you have to spend creating the podcast. It becomes a balance of things.
Yes, for sure.
Time is that resource that we can never get more of. And once it's gone, you can't get it back. So
exactly.
It's an interesting one.
So I think the best way in my mind to kind of end this sort of section of the discussion focused around content is, and you've given a lot of great advice just throughout this conversation for anyone who's looking to kind of start their own podcast or start their own editing or, you know, all of that. What would be like your, you know, little sound bite that you would tell somebody who wants to do the things that you're doing, that wants to start a podcast or that wants to get into like turning their love of podcasting into some sort of a business thing? What's your like 30-second sound bite for that?
Okay. So if someone who's already been podcasting a little bit and is going, hey, I can do this for me, can I do it for other people? Do it for free first with a client that you know well, that will happily give you feedback and will happily work in with you to make sure that not only that you're delivering what they expect, but also that they're giving you what you need to be able to deliver that service. That is verboten these days. Don't do work for free, is what they say. Free internships. Terrible. It's terrible in corporations. But for something as subjective as podcasting is, that is as difficult to define as clients or podcasters without this kind of thing at the back of their mind, you know, that they can't be as specific as you need them to be. Like the podcasting language of things is so difficult to be concise with enough where everybody has a shared language about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'd say do the first one or two for free. Once you establish that value, start moving on to other people and, you know, start working your way up with a price that you feel is attractive. Sometimes you might have to work with an indie that has a bit of a lower budget than you expect. Don't expect it to kick off like straight away. Like this isn't you selling products off a shelf in a shop in the middle of, you know, a busy supermarket or, you know, downtown square or something like that.
Yeah.
People aren't just going to walk past you and say, oh, he does that. I'd love to get some podcast editing from him. But at the same time, pacing yourself means you have an opportunity to learn. So if you haven't used RX10 or a set of effects and plugins to remove the bad things from audio that you need to remove, like reverb, like if a dog is barking in the background, like if, it could be anything. Anything that you're doing with the effects to improve it, you need practice with that. And you need different types of audio to do that with, not just yourself. So it'll be a slow drive upwards. Eventually, you'll get to the point where you've established your value. You'll have testimonials that people can give others about how good your services are. And once you're at that point, it starts to become a world is your oyster kind of thing. You know, you can see where you want to go with it. So I'm really sad that the soundbite is start for free at the beginning.
Right.
But I think it should probably actually be practice. Practice with your own voice, practice with other people's voices. And once you get that practice, you get the experience. And then you can make other people's productions good as well. Like having the microphone just off the corner of your mouth instead of right in front of you, because you're sick of editing the 40th podcast where every time you say pizza, it gently pummels your eardrums to the point where you have to throw your headphones off and, you know, cool out in the backyard just for 10 minutes and then come back to the edit.
Exactly. No, that's really good advice. I think we're going to shift into some gaming conversation here, so I hope you're ready for that. And the way that I like to kick that off is a real It's an easy one. How long have you been into gaming? When did it start?
Well, that's always an interesting one for me because I was into video games before I had access to them. I think the true answer is probably since maybe 7 or 8 years old, because every morning before school, we'd get dropped off at one of my friends' houses so they could drive us to school. And he had a Sega Master System. So I was able to play Sonic for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however long it took them to get ready in the morning. And that would be my hit of games. And I think it's just one of those things that just hits you right at the beginning and you're just sucked in. Like you can't stay away. Having a Nintendo 64 at the after school care at the primary school that I went to, that was maybe watching people for an hour and playing for 5 minutes. But still, that was enough to keep me there, to draw me in. And, I still enjoyed then. I was unfortunate to not get a console, probably because I grew up in the time where it would rot your brain.
Yeah.
Only just moved on from television rotting brains at that point. I think I got the PS1, the teeny tiny little one, the PlayStation 1 console first. I think probably in, it's a really good question, maybe 2005, and then a PS2 after that. And then that was for almost that full generation. So by that point, I had disposable income around the time that the Xbox 360 came around.
Yeah.
And then I was able to jump into that generation. And then it's been, I was about to say self-sustaining since. I don't think it really is. I think if anyone listening to this looks at their Steam catalog and goes, yeah, that was a healthy amount of money I spent on video games, I don't think you're looking at the right catalog. But anyway, that's where I got my start. So it probably didn't kick off properly until, I was maybe 13 or 14.
So it sounds like PlayStation and, before that, I guess Sega and Nintendo were kind of your gateways in. What would you consider your preferred console / PC of choice? Where do you kind of lean and come down on that?
Well, I'm actually agnostic in those senses.
Yes.
I actually forgot that I had a Game Boy for a long time.
Oh, nice.
I had a Game Boy Pocket. Yeah, Game Boy Pocket. And then a Game Boy Color. And then that Game Boy Color got stolen when our hotel room was broken into on a family holiday.
Ooh.
Oh, no.
And it was replaced with a Game Boy Advance SP. So I couldn't really complain.
Yeah.
That's an upgrade.
But I had 147 Pokemon on Silver.
Oh, no.
Or 247 or whatever. I needed 3. And they stole that cartridge. And I haven't played Pokemon again since. So
So it probably made you a better person then in the long run.
I think I was much more well-rounded gamer for that reason. So I have to thank them, I guess. And I've forgotten what the question was. What was the question?
Oh, just if you had a preferred console or prefer PC or anything like that. So
look, I'm a fair weather gamer, I think. It was very much a budget gamer before that.
Yes.
So PS2, I think, was better than Xbox, though admittedly they were probably neck and neck at that stage. An Xbox 360 was attractive with a massive 2 gigabyte memory card or hard drive or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Right.
It was also pretty cheap when I got it, so that was good. As soon as it was feasible, PC gaming for me was ideal as well. Largely wasn't until I started building my own PCs, though. There's only so much you can do with the Dells that your parents have to buy because that's the only thing they know.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think I have to say I'm a PC gamer foremost these days, though. I haven't touched a Series X or a PS5. Again, mostly pandemic availability. And in Australia, these things, they might be 400 for you. They'll be like 900, 1,000 Australian dollars for us. Yeah, the markup is pretty ridiculous. So, yeah, I think I'd have to say I'm PC most of the time. That's where a lot of my investment has been, and spending a lot of time in front of the computer, it just makes sense to have games on a computer. It's an interesting experience for me now because I had a desktop PC in Australia that I've since loaned to a friend, 32 gig RAM, RTX 3060, again, in a country where there were no graphics cards under 2,500 Australian dollars. Yeah. This is why the NVIDIA stuff sticks in my brain, because I'm like, graphics cards, you could buy an entire computer for what you spend on one graphics card. You can spend 10,000 Australian dollars on, I think at the time that I was looking, it was like a 3080 Super or whatever the big one was. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Oh, man.
So yeah, PC, probably mostly. But I've gone PlayStation, Xbox, kind of bounced off the whole lot. Nintendo doesn't count for that, right? Like, Nintendo is its own console. It kind of lives in its own world.
It's like supplemental almost.
Yeah. I was going to say, I feel like people who, have much stronger opinions on the Xbox, PlayStation, or whatever, they're always like, oh yeah, and also I have a Switch, or I play, a bunch of DS games, or, whatever it may be. So
it's funny, I did forget I have a Switch too.
Yep. It's just like a given at this point. So
yeah, but it's mostly curiosity, I think. Like, how can they release a brand new Nintendo-only game like Tears of the Kingdom on a console that's been out for 7 or 8 years with no meaningful power improvement, where they could probably do it and have that be one of the most, popular, successful, financially successful games out there?
Yeah.
And yet Bayonetta 3 runs like dog poo.
Yeah.
It's curiosity. Like, you wonder, what's the game that you play on the Switch that ultimately makes you want to snap it in half?
Yeah.
And you have to buy another one anyway. And it'd be so easy to do.
Oh, yeah.
Just crack that bad boy over your knee. And then bam, you've got an NVIDIA shield.
Yes. Yes. For sure. Yeah. Every time I hold mine, I'm like, this feels so fragile. And like, people just give these to their children. So
yeah. But big hands too. So I'm a big hand lad, and I really struggled to like hold the thing. I think the buttons are just too small for me. And I'm not someone who would prefer to have something in handheld, because, again, my secret leaning into fitness, I know that my rear delts, my back shoulders, don't have enough strength in them to hold it in front of my face for long. So I'm one of those guys who went on Amazon and got an arm and lie in bed with it sitting above my face and just kind of with your arms by your sides with the Joy-Cons out and just go like,
he solved it. He solved the how to play in bed.
Yes, I was going to say
it like that.
my thing with the Switch is I am convinced that there is not a comfortable way to hold that thing if you are over the age of like 12. So
yeah. And, health and wellness people will tell you, well, the only good posture is your next posture. And you're like, tell that to my arms that have run out of, circulation, because I have to rigidly hold my shoulders in place, or I've given up, gone the full gamer lean, and circulation to my hands is cutting off because I'm, on my knees, basically, resting my arms.
Exactly.
Oh, boy. I don't think that was the question, but Switch hate.
Yes.
Work that into the title for this episode.
Well, clickbait there,
Yeah.
Matthew Bliss hates the Switch.
Right. Come find out why.
Yeah. Do it.
So my next question for you is one that is either going to be extremely easy or one that you're going to be like, oh, this question. But what is your favorite game of all time?
Not a hard one.
Okay.
Well, it's not hard. There's always a couple. In fact, I ruminate my time on the Game & Watch podcast, where every year, because there was two main hosts and a few other people that rotated as guests, they were always hopeful. They put up the list and said, hey, put your top 5 to 10 games of all time in there. And the 5 that I always rotate through are Hades, the rebooted God of War. I'm unsure if Ragnarok should be included in there, but I think it necessarily has to be, just because of the progression of the character. All the characters.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy X, and a couple of others that escape my brain. Actually, one of them's from Comeback. Need for Speed.
Underground?
No.
Hot Pursuit?
It's the one with the Blacklist.
Oh.
Carbon?
Nope, before that. Carbon comes after this one. But they did remake it.
Speed.
I feel like an awful person.
No,
I'm trying. Need for Speed.
it was not Most Wanted.
Had a black edition. Yes, Most Wanted.
Oh, okay.
Most Wanted.
Yes.
Yeah, I said Hot Pursuit.
Oh,
not Most
okay.
Wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Both
thought you
of
said
them-
Most Wanted.
You'd be forgiven because both of them have had reboots with
Yeah, and
Criterion.
remakes of the reboot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Need for Speed Most Wanted, Black Edition, amazing racing game. I have never enjoyed a Need for Speed after that. Even though Carbon was pretty good with muscle cars for drifting, Pro Street was all right, and I think Horizon on Xbox, is that the
That's Forza.
Forza Horizon.
Horizon.
Yeah.
Don't come out of the woodwork and tell me that the Blacklist doesn't beat Horizon, because I've played Horizon. That did not engage me as much as trying to race people through the streets of whatever town that was.
Yeah. Yes.
Clearly my favorite
Oh.
game.
Yeah, absolutely.
The thing that I will say about Most Wanted is it unlocked a love of hard rock and metal music for me, because it had Disturbed, it had Bullet for My Valentine, Avenged Sevenfold, just was a product of its time.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Anyway.
That sounds incredible.
Yes.
It is. It is. And someone did a mod for it because it's such an old game. I had it on 360. There was a PC version, and it was in the Vista, Windows Vista time. So
Oh, Lord.
it doesn't work natively, but
Yeah,
someone's got a
right.
mod for it, so you can download it for free and play it if you can search that out. It holds up. It
Yeah.
really does. But all that is to say, Final Fantasy X will always be my favorite game. And before you pull up your meme of Tidus laughing out of context completely, it was the first game that I bought off the shelf, knowing nothing about it.
Right.
Just looked good. Had a PS2 at the time, so I bought
Those
that.
were the days.
Yeah. Like, judge a book by its cover, judge a game by its cover art. And, sometimes you could be sorely disappointed.
Yeah.
Need for Speed. Ooh. Inspection. Something like that. Yeah. Don't even bother looking it up. Awful. Return day off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Final Fantasy X, pulled it off the shelf. 120 hours later, I've laughed. I've cried. I've been on game FAQs. Not sure if you say game facts or game FAQs, but gamefacts.com
Yeah.
for probably a few hours already and downloaded some guides. And I liked it so much that I got a tattoo of it. My
Nice.
first tattoo was of the logo of the Sadnik and Dabes. So that game really, I think, was the one that unlocked the idea that I would be a gamer forever, because it had such a powerful narrative, such engaging characters. The gameplay was so diverse, even though it wasn't completely dialed in. I mean, anyone who's got the Saturn crest out of the Thunder Plains, kudos to you, my friend, but I will not be sitting down avoiding lightning strikes 200 times in a row. But it was just, I think it's severely underrated as a game for its time. Like, people would talk about Final Fantasy 16 being amazing. It's a return to form for the Final Fantasy series. But, I mean, 10 just hits different. I think people know that, even the ones who don't like it. It's fashionable to not like Final Fantasy X. But I think Jay from Super Bracket Bros got a bit of a surprise on that one too. On their recent bracket, they had Sim,
Yes.
who was from Final Fantasy X. And yeah, a lot of support for that guy, even though he was the evil villain. But the complexity of that villain, I don't think it suited their bracket well enough, where it didn't get its due. No spoilers for SBB on
Yes.
this podcast, of course. You should go and listen to their show. But
You should.
yeah, Final Fantasy X, final answer.
Nice. So I am a firm believer that there are things in games that make it, like a Dylan game or a Matthew game or an Andrew game. And so what would you say are some of those things that you look for in a game, or like a game trailer, a game review, that kind of clue you into like, this is probably going to be a game that is for me? Like you're playing it, you're 5 hours in. What are the things that you're noticing that you're like, yeah, I'm going to stick with this no matter how long it is, and I'm really enjoying this?
Disturbed, Avenged Sevenfold, Bullet for My Valentine. He already said.
It's never popped up again. I cannot think of a game besides the one that Avenged Sevenfold made themselves that would include their music.
They were in Call of Duty.
Of course they were.
Yep. You love to trot that fact out.
Look, I'm going to report tomorrow that that Omni-Man is going to be in Mortal Kombat. Like Homelander is in there too.
Yeah.
I think we're in the age of costumes. Fortnite has unlocked that for the world.
Yes. Oh yeah.
I hope they're proud of themselves. So the game that is quintessentially me, or that I will play without question.
Or what are some aspects of a game that, like, what's a game got to have in it for you to be like, this is a game for me? Is it narrative? Is it sound design? Is it tight gameplay? Is it, what are some of those things for you that you look for in a game?
I think our Call of Duties and our FIFAs of the world are not in the realm for me. I think I will avoid them like the plague for some reason. Borderlands was my first onboarding to a first-person shooter, if that helps.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's the ethereal experience of the game. Like, I will try anything. I think the shorter list will be games that I will not pick up and try.
Right.
I've often reflected, though, on exactly what about certain games continues my enjoyment of them. Like, Cuphead is one of those.
Yeah.
A game that just beats down your soul into submission and
yes, it does.
makes you hate life and yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I almost got to the very end. And what I've discovered about myself is that I enjoy a challenge, and I like beating my head against the brick until there's brain matter there. I just, like, I'm playing Lies of P at the moment. Very much a Souls-like. Quite enjoyable. But man, those bosses, they really ramp up.
Yes.
And it's the kind of game where you'll get a really difficult one, and then it'll be a fun time, slide downwards until you hit the next slope up, and then it just gets hard again. And I played Dark Souls 2, I played Bloodborne, I played a lot of those games that require a lot of challenge, and they appeal to me, no doubt. Sekiro, I love that game. But there's another class as well where, like, a strong narrative is always going to be good. Like, I really enjoy a good story that ties together with a gameplay that knows what it is. A game that's lost its way and has something shoved in because some stakeholders in the game's development decided that Fortnite just came out, so we need shooty bang guns in there.
Yeah,
that kind of thing. I think Cocoon, that's come out this week, is one of those games. Can't be entirely certain. There's also The Puzzler, which I am oft disappointed by, but just as often really surprised by. Like, there's a subset of games that I will always quote as being a very good puzzler that keeps the user engaged. The Talos Principle.
Yep.
The Witness. Talos Principle 2 is announced as well, so keep an eye out for that this year. Maybe.
Hopefully.
What was it? Braid. But that's just a Jonathan Blow fanboy at that point.
Yeah.
And there was another one I had in my mind, but it's just left. Oh, yeah. Superliminal.
Oh,
Very interesting game. And then there's the cast-off of the puzzlers, the ones that are the cult classics. Have you guys heard of Assemblance?
I'm not familiar with that, no.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard of that one.
Amazing. I've never been on a podcast, said that game's name, and had people know what game I'm talking about. It's like a horror style game where someone is going into a room that's programmed to access memories, and they're experiencing those memories in different ways and interacting with objects to make things happen. And it slowly unveils a story of some kind, but it's a puzzle in that way. Like, you'll be unlocking codes and things like that, but is by no means simple.
Yeah.
And it's a game where you have to go outside the game to get the answers you need to solve the puzzles inside.
Nice.
Those kinds of games that kind of bend things backwards on itself. Doki Doki Literature Club.
Yeah.
Played that on recommendation. Loved it. And for those who don't know why, play it.
Yeah.
It's pretty.
Don't look it up. Just go in and play it.
Don't look for a guide. Don't go on GameFAQs and look up DDLC. Just download it and play it free on Steam. So the esoteric, the well-functioning, the puzzlers, just a good game that suits me well. Like, has a bit of challenge. It knows what it is. It does what it does well. But if you talked to me 10 years ago, probably the Elder Scrolls games would have been that. Like, massive open world, a little bit of jank, just enough to have a duplicating watermelon in a town you can't go back to.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Yeah. I don't know. That's the answer I'd give today. I'm a sommelier of video games. I'm the kind of guy who likes to think that he's the kind of person who can say, what do you like? Tell me 3 things and I'll give you a game that you'll enjoy. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's not a lot I'll say no to.
Nice. Well, kind of jumping off of that a little bit and for reference to people listening, by the time this episode comes out, Spider-Man and Super Mario Wonder will both be out. But what game on the horizon are you most excited about? What are you most anticipated for right now?
Honestly, I don't know. Doing the dead drop again means that I'm tapping into the new space and trying to get new projections for what will be coming around. I know that Starfield was on there for a long time. That was the thing that was waited for. Same with Tears of the Kingdom. Elden Ring last year now?
Yeah.
Did that come out March last year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's time dilation for you.
Yes.
It was like yesterday. I honestly don't know what the landscape looks like at the moment. For me anyway. I know that my time is very rarely going to be my own as my podcast editing stuff grows and grows. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I don't have a PlayStation console available to me, and I probably won't for as long as I live in Ireland, and I'm not sure where I'll be long term. So that kind of counts me out for it. But yeah, I'm sorry I don't have an answer for you. I know what I'll be playing next, but not what I'll be playing in 6 months.
Cool. Well, I think that is about it for the interview portion of this episode. Unless there's anything else you want to say before we close that part out and move into our game.
No, I don't actually have any advice for gamers. Just keep enjoying stuff.
Yeah.
It's so easy. Like, this is good for the podcasters too. It's so attractive for gamers to make video games their vocation. For podcasting, this is something that comes about too. Like, when you have to play a game every week.
Yeah.
There's a podcast I edit for, Podcast Assemble. They watch a movie every week so that they can review and discuss it on the show. Sometimes it's new ones. Sometimes it's old ones. Like the one that came out at the time of recording, they discussed The Happening with Mark Wahlberg. Amazing, humorous episode. I would urge you to go check that out if you can. But yeah, just make sure you keep enjoying games. If you walk up to your video game podcast and you're like, man, I really did not want to put 40 hours of Starfield into my week, then get rid of something.
Yeah.
Maybe Starfield.
Get rid of Starfield. That's what
I've
I
been hearing mixed reviews about that game. But
Yep.
Yeah, just keep enjoying games.
Yes.
Nice. Good advice. Well, with that, let's go ahead and roll into our closing segment for this episode. All right, Dylan, what are we doing?
It's very aggressive.
Well, you have a history, your games.
I do.
I don't know what we're doing on this one, if you're bringing up Google or if we're going to play something fun.
To be fair, I think listeners probably enjoy I Got It From Google a lot more than you do. And I enjoy torturing you with I Got It From Google. But today, what we will be doing, so one of Matthew's main shows is the Dead Drop Games News Show. And so I have selected kind of from the various sort of happenings in video game news from the past couple of weeks, some topics that are going to inform the themes of these next of the game that we play. And so we are going to, don't have a catchy title. I forget if I came up with a catchy title for this game last time. But essentially what we are going to be doing is I'm going to give Matthew and Andrew a category. For example, Pokemon games. Andrew and Matthew will take turns going back and forth to select a Pokemon game. I will be looking those games up on Metacritic, and they are targeting trying to get a cumulative Metacritic score of 200. So they want to be ideally the closest without going over. Having played this game several times, pretty much every time we're going to go over. And so the secondary win condition is be the closest, having gone over to that 200 mark. So we've got a couple of different categories. And so, Matthew, you're our guest, so I'll let you kind of have the first pick of the games. But this week, as of recording this, Microsoft has finalized their acquisition of Activision Blizzard King. And so our first theme for the games that you were going to be selecting are Activision Blizzard King games. So give me one. I will look it up. If it's on multiple platforms, I'll let you tell me which platform you want it to be from. So like, if it came out on Xbox, PS5, and PC, you can tell me which of those platforms you want me to pull the score from. But Matthew, I'll let you kick it off. What is your first Activision Blizzard King game that you are going to draft for your roster here?
Oh, it's so interesting. I'm just trying to go through it and think, because mobile games are interesting. You wouldn't think that they have a Metacritic score. But
Yeah,
the Candy Crush of things is interesting.
I cannot confirm that King games will necessarily be able to show up. You are welcome to try. But some of those, like Candy Crush does have a score. Not that one's a big enough one. I'm not sure that all of their games would have a score.
Okay. First one will be Diablo 4.
Okay.
Diablo, however you say it.
So for Diablo 4, do you have a preference on
PC?
Okay.
The next one will be Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2.
All right.
Which one?
Which version?
The original. So that would be Xbox. Or would it be everything?
I believe it came out on 360, PlayStation,
and
PS3, and PC.
Okay. Let's go with Xbox. Around that time period, I'd say that was their demographic.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have that one.
Okay, and third one. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It might be cheating if I ask you to help me. But there was Heroes of the Storm.
Heroes of the Storm. Okay. The MOBA from Blizzard.
Yes, that will be my third. And I think that will get me pretty close. Because MOBAs are always, or this MOBA is fairly divergent. I know that Diablo 4 has run into a bit of controversy the last couple of days, particularly their Season 2 announcement. Apparently they did a teaser video that's now been pulled because it contained a lot of wrong information.
Yeah.
Like the formulas being bad for their XP calculations, which were meant to improve things. They're like, people went through the math and said, that doesn't add up.
Right.
Like they showed they're working and it bit them in the ass. So
yes.
Wow.
Yeah, I reckon those three. I reckon they get me pretty close.
All right. And so, Andrew, I will let you go. You could pick all three of the same games. Please don't, because that would defeat the purpose of this game. So
we can't have a winner then.
Exactly.
Yeah. I will go with Activision did the Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2
Yes.
remake, right? Yeah. I'll do that on, I guess, Xbox.
Oh my God. I just remembered an amazing one. That would be like, I'll explain afterwards. Keep going.
So it has, I'm going to give you the Xbox One scores because it's only got one review on the Xbox Series X.
Okay.
And they have made a different distinction between the two.
Gotcha. That's fine.
Okay.
And then I'll go Call of Duty Black Ops
Okay.
for Xbox as well.
Which one? Are there two?
Black
Cold
Ops got
War.
rebooted,
Cold
I
War.
think.
I guess.
Yeah,
it's
I
still
want
rebooted.
like the original Black
Okay.
Ops, like the first one. And then my last game, I'm going to go with, what was it? Warcraft 3 Reforged.
Oh, that's amazing. That is an amazing pick. Can I tell you what I remembered?
Yeah.
Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5.
Oh, yeah. With the board and everything.
Ace in the hole. That's going to be as close to 0 as you can possibly get. Oh, boy.
So, both of you have gone over the 200 target, which, like I said, pretty common. Matthew. Diablo 4 got an 86 Metacritic. Modern Warfare 2, the original Modern Warfare 2, got a 94 on Xbox. And Heroes of the Storm got an 86, which brings your total to 266. Yes.
So surprised by that last one.
Yeah, I was also surprised that Heroes of the Storm, because like I know people liked it after the fact, but I didn't think they liked it when it came out, and now it's dead.
Yeah, like it died. That's what I was kind of going on there. I mean, I didn't know much about it. I knew that Activision Blizzard used it as a tie-in for a lot of their games, like Dota. You'd have skins for everything from other games in there.
Yeah,
but boy, I really blew that. Oh well.
Andrew, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 got an 88. The original Black Ops game got an 87.
Okay.
And people were very angry at World of Warcraft Reforged, and it got a 59, which is just so sad because Warcraft 3 is fantastic, and it makes me sad that the remaster is so poorly regarded. So,
well, I think we've got a clear winner here.
Yes.
Since
so
I picked AAA, gaming giants with somehow. I don't even know how that happened, but anyway.
That will be a point for Andrew. Andrew will take that round. We are going to go into round 2. So part of this Activision Blizzard deal is that Xbox had to agree to allow Ubisoft to have all of the streaming rights for games in the UK and EU, and I think it was all of the EU territories that they had to do this for.
It's funny, I was actually researching that today because it was part of the announcement. Obviously, being out of the news cycle, I missed that. So I was trying to investigate, and they worded it a really strange way where it sounded like the rest of the planet as opposed to just the EU.
Oh, okay.
So I wish I could correct you on that, but I really don't know.
This one's a little bit more of a stretch than the previous one. But it might be a little bit easier because you're going to have an easier time finding bad Ubisoft games than you were. So I want you to give me 3 Ubisoft games, and I'll let Matthew start us off here with his first 3 picks.
Okay. I want to start with Valorant. Is that a Ubisoft game?
Valorant, I believe, is Steam. No, Riot game. Yeah.
Oh, it is Riot, isn't it? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, they have their like battle royale shooter game, but I can't remember what it's called or if it's still alive.
Yeah, it was. I know what you're talking about. I can't remember.
Yeah,
the name
I can't
of it,
remember
though.
its name.
All right. I am going to dazzle you with my my knowledge of Ubisoft games, because not only do we have our prime titles, we also have our Ubisoft supported indies.
Mm-hmm.
Though I may be thinking of EA supported ones, so you might have to correct me again. Let's start with Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
Yes, Valhalla is definitely one. Valhalla came out on a bunch of different platforms. What score would you like?
Ooh, after my performance on the last one, I think I'll be picking the glitchy one. Let's go with PC.
Okay. All right. Good choice.
I mean, they can't be happy if there's mods, right?
Yeah.
Number 2, Child of Light.
All right, Child of Light.
Which I hope is a middling to poor game, but we'll see. I know I didn't enjoy it. It was 10 Australian dollars that I wish I could get back.
This one is also on a bunch of different platforms. Do you have which preference would you like?
Take your pick, or an aggregate. The problem I have with the game that I think everybody did is the story, not the performance. So just pick PC. That'll be fine. I think I'm stuck here. Ubisoft. See, there's a few aces in the hole that you know will do well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do it. Assassin's Creed Mirage. Let's just Let's just throw it out
Alright.
there.
Okay.
Wow, recent.
Yeah. Very disappointed people I know
Yeah.
of. So, mostly outlets, though. The way that the discussion seems to be around the game at the moment is what it's missing,
Right.
which I hope lends itself to a lower score. But I may be pleasantly surprised.
There are multiple reviews, but they are all currently the same for all of the platforms. So I don't have to get your preference there.
It's a good sign, hopefully.
All right. Andrew, that brings us to yours.
Assassin's Creed Black Flag.
All right.
Solid choice. Ooh.
I was kicking around like, which of the good ones do I want to throw out? 2 and Brotherhood popped up in my head. I was like, we'll go Pirates.
All right. You've got your pick of, PlayStation, Xbox, PC, Wii U, etc.
I'll go Xbox on this one.
Okay.
You don't want to balance it out and choose the Wii U?
The Wii U, yeah.
Since you've chosen Xbox, I will say Wii U had the second highest, which shocks me because I'm like, really? It was the second highest rated?
They were starving for
helps
games over there.
That's
if
true.
the 3 people that reviewed it
That's
enjoyed
fair.
That too.
That's fair. Yeah.
A lot of
So,
factors.
yes.
Let's see. Man, I'm trying to think of some of the like not so massive properties that they do. Let's go Ghost Recon. The most recent one, I can't remember the subtitle.
The one with John Bernthal or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that the
Yeah, because I know that people liked Wildlands. I want the other one.
Breakpoint?
Breakpoint,
No.
yeah.
Yes.
Is that
yeah,
it?
It was Yeah, Breakpoint was 2019
And I'll do that on PC.
on PC. Okay. All right.
And then, man, I really wish the Avatar game was out because I don't think it's going to be good. But
Are we talking about The Way of the Water, or are we talking about The Last Airbender?
The Way of the Water, they're
Yeah.
making an Avatar game that looks basically like just reskinned Far Cry.
I like Far Cry. There's another property there.
Yeah, I know. That's probably where I'm going next. I'm just trying to decide which one.
I really wish this wasn't a game because we could have so much fun. I've got some contenders that I'm listing down as I think of them that I can bring up once we've locked everything in.
Exactly.
I'm trying to think of like older. I guess I'll go with just like the first Far Cry.
Okay. From 2004. It has the same score on PC and Xbox. It also came out on the Wii. Do you have a preference?
Yeah, give me that Wii.
Okay.
That's funny.
All right. So, Matthew, Assassin's Creed Valhalla had an 82.
Expected.
Child of Light got a 77.
Fucking hell.
And
What are these reviewers doing? Anyway.
right.
I mean, a bad
and-
review score is a 6, so
right. And Assassin's Creed Mirage also got a 77, bringing your total to 236. So pretty close to that 200 mark. Just a little bit over, though. Andrew, Black Flag got an 86.
oh, interesting.
Ghost Recon Breakpoint had a 58. And then the Wii version of Far Cry, the original Far Cry game, got a 38,
Wow.
putting you at 182. So,
Technically, he gets it, right?
yes,
That
technically,
might be the best round I've ever had when we played this game.
yeah. So you were a total of 18, I guess, points away, putting you closest and under to the target 200 there. And so the final category here is related to the fact that as we are recording this, Spider-Man 2 for the PlayStation comes out later this week. And so that got me thinking about superhero games. That is going to be the category, is superhero games. Now, I will preface this by saying it doesn't necessarily have to be like a
Marvel or DC.
Marvel or DC character superhero game, because there are games like Infamous that I would consider a superhero game. Prototype I could kind of see as being, you could justify that as kind of that sort of superhero game. If you really wanted to stretch, like a Saints Row 3, Saints Row 4 could maybe kind of be considered a superhero
maybe
game.
4, I don't know about 3.
So, I'm willing to accept some justification on your end if there's something that you're like, I want this game that doesn't fall under, DC, Marvel, or like Dark Horse or one of those. Earlier, Matthew, you mentioned that Omni-Man is going to be in the new Mortal Kombat. You could justify maybe some Mortal Kombat games. So,
Okay.
But so what would your 3 picks be?
I'm guessing I'm going first this time.
Yes.
Marvel's Avengers has to go up there.
Yeah.
Good choice.
We have to keep that going because, boy, howdy. Disney will figure that out. I think they're starting to entertain internal development now.
Yeah.
God, has the Black Panther game come out yet?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
God, barely been announced, has it? This is really difficult because not only do we have the task of picking a game, and me not being someone who went for licensed games, I have very few conventional superheroes that I could pick from.
Yeah.
And look, which of us is going to pick Spider-Man, which got like a 92 or something,
Right?
Probably. And Wolverine hasn't come out. There has to be an X-Men game out there somewhere.
There was.
Wolverine's got one.
There were some Wolverine games, just not the new Insomniac one yet.
Right. True.
No. Yeah. Justify as a superhero. Okay. Look, give me Second Son.
Okay.
Like, I'm inspired there. And then give me Prototype 2.
Okay. Yes.
I'm sorry. Like clearly that one could argue there's some bias there,
Right.
but it's what I know. And
For sure.
This doesn't need to be a 3-hour podcast while I run through my back catalog of games, which I could, justify arguably as superhero. Thanks, Dylan. Have fun, Andrew. Cause no copying.
All right.
I want, what did they call it? Wolverine Origins. It was a tie-in to the movie, but it was actually a good game. People really liked it.
Okay. I have that one.
It was an M-rated Wolverine game where you actually got to like hack stuff up and his skin would come off as you took damage. That was pretty cool. Then I would like The Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction.
Based on the Ang Lee picture, I imagine.
I think it was, yeah. But it was actually also a really good game. At least child me really loved it. You could like make boxing gloves out of 2 halves of a car.
Oh, that's all you need, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then for my final superhero game, give me how far back do these reviews go?
Anything from like original Xbox, PS2 era, GameCube era.
On here?
There are some, but I can't guarantee
Superman
older
64.
Thought you were going to say Conker's Bad Fur Day. And I'm like, nah, dude, that's not getting past.
He's technically a superhero.
Maybe to some people.
I am not seeing Superman 64.
Okay. Then my other game, I guess I'll go with the Mortal Kombat versus DC
Okay.
game that they did. I don't think that game was super beloved. I don't think it found its audience.
Mortal
find
Kombat
out, though.
versus DC Universe. Okay.
Would Kingdom Hearts count?
I think you could justify Kingdom Hearts.
A
like
Kingdom Hearts fan can justify anything.
that's also fair.
That is a superpower.
All right. So, Matthew, we've got your first game of Marvel's Avengers coming in at a 67, which seems maybe a little bit nice.
High, yeah.
Yeah, for what...
Revised, it would be incredibly low.
Yeah.
But.
And then Infamous Second Son at an 80, and then Prototype 2 at a 74. And so that puts you at 221.
Gotta stop picking all these good games, man.
Clearly, I have a superpower where I have somehow managed to play or remember only games that have been rated well. And like, even if I find them terrible, they're objectively good. How does that work?
Right. It's a larger conversation about games review process, but
Yes.
we don't have time for that on this episode.
Yes.
Or maybe I should have been playing more video games. Maybe that's what I need to learn from this. Anyway.
Andrew, I am blanking on what your first game was. What was it?
The Incredible Hulk
the
Ultimate Destruction.
Yes. No, you picked Wolverine first.
Oh, I did Wolverine first? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Because I was like, Incredible Hulk was a good game. And so Wolverine came in at a 75. Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction came in at the 84 mark. And then Mortal Kombat versus DC Universe was a 72, putting you at 231, meaning that Matthew takes this final category here.
Nice.
Brought it
the
back.
battle that lost the war.
Yes. Yes. So, but thank you both for playing. You know, it's one of those tougher games because you're like Matthew said, I don't remember exactly what the critical side of things thought of this game. I know I played it and was like, meh, you know. It is a tougher one, especially when you're trying to balance in there kind of like there's a little bit more strategy there of like, I can't just pick all bangers. I need to pick kind of like everything in the like 70s range, you know?
Yeah, I think the first round, I was like, excellent, terrible. But you can't really do that because, you know, if you got your aces in the hole straight away and you're hoping that you'll draw a 2,
yeah, exactly.
It's not going to work. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, because the terrible can work. A lot of games that we think are terrible reviewed better than we think. You know, like what was it? Breakpoint, where we're like, oh, that was like critically panned and the fans did not like it. 58, you know, it's like, oh, well, that's not the 30 I was hoping it would have. So
yeah, I think an interesting twist on this game would be to use user scores because then you could pick Last of Us 2 to get your 0 or whatever.
That's fair. Yeah.
God, and then go Roman, like take Steam reviews.
Oh yes, yes,
yeah,
yes. That would be a lot because it's like what game recently had an update that everyone just hated because that is now review bombed.
Exactly.
At the time of recording, this game is terrible.
Exactly.
Nice.
Exactly.
Well, Matthew, this is the part of the show as we come to the end here where I want you to plug all your stuff. Obviously, I'm going to get the information from you. It will all be in the description of this episode, but go ahead and let people know where they can find you.
For sure. So we started off talking about a podcast journey. One of those journeys is that you don't have to be on every social media platform to find your audience. So you will find me on precious few. If you would like to subscribe to Dead Drop Game News, you can go to deaddroppodcast.com. You can find me on Instagram, Dead Drop Podcast, or just search it up on your podcast player. I'm pretty sure I'm the only podcast with that name, so it should be relatively easy. If you're interested in From My Home to Yours, you can go to, God, where can you go? I think I've set up From My Home to Yours podcast.com, but that's a lot to type. So instead, head to mbpod.com. And not only will you see the current podcast projects, as well as some archived ones, you'll also see my podcast advertising services, some client testimonials, and soon to come a client showcase where you'll be able to see the podcasts I've edited for. And you can decide for yourself if you'd like to take up my services, which, if you would like to do, I can be very reasonable and my quality is incredible. You can get in touch with me directly at blisserypodcasts@gmail.com, or again, head to mbpod.com or matthewbliss.net or blissery.fm, any of those, and maybe just pick one. And we can start a conversation.
Nice.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for coming on, letting our audience get to know you a little bit better, letting us get to know you a little bit better. It's been a really good time. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah,
me too. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being on.
Awesome. And with that, that is all we've got for this episode. Thank you all so much for listening, and we will catch you on the next one. We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of the Friendly Neighborhood Gamers podcast. If so, we would greatly appreciate your help in growing the show and the community by giving us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any other podcasting app that allows it.
We also have some great videos on our YouTube channel, including reviews, rankings, and other topics. We would really appreciate you checking it out. And if you want to keep up with everything going on in the neighborhood, follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and feel free to jump in our Discord server.
We hope to see you there. Links for everything are in the podcast description. Thanks again for listening, and remember,
Stay friendly, gamers.